So, Alexandre, can you switch off your camera? Thank you. So today I'm talking to Liz Lockwood, who heads up the Europe office from The Sound. So Liz is perhaps one of the most enthusiastic persons I've met. She's deeply passionate about her work, and she loves the pet category, which means that we love her too. So we will have a chat about brands and their superpower, and especially for those of you who have a direct-to-consumer model. So when I think about my favorite brands, I guess the words that come to my mind is, I trust my brands, it's safe, it's high quality. So I would invite all of you to put it into the chat box if there are any words that you associate with your brand so that we can hear what you have to say about the brands as well. So now I'm going to let Liz go ahead and introduce herself. I'm sure you'll do a much better job at it than I would. So please, Liz, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Kim. So yes, as Kim said, I head up the Europe office for The Sound, but I am, for 20 years, I've been fascinated with pet owners, having been one right from a young age. And before I even got into strategy and research and advertising, I was always fascinated by the dynamic and watching people with their pets. And beautifully over the years, that's translated into being able to make a living out of doing it. And particularly, I find it super exciting to help businesses who are starting up, who are trying to find a real opportunity to tap in, and particularly more recently because it's really about solving a problem most people are facing themselves. So yeah, it's the magic brand strategy pets. And I do have, and I apologise if they visit us during the session, I have two giant Maine Coons who like to disrupt me continuously. So apologies in advance if one flies behind my head.
Good. So let's just jump in, Liz. So why is for the direct to consumer startups that we have here, why is brand so important, and why do you call it the superpower?
Okay, so firstly, I'm a firm believer that as a D2C, you've got a greater shot at creating and successfully growing a business and brand than the non-D2C competition. And that's simply because you have much more control over your brand, over your relationships with consumers. And I know D2C in theory refers to a sales channel, but I'm using the term to describe businesses such as yours that are digital natives. Ones that at their best use emotional, aspirational storytelling to build those relationships that endure and add continuous value, and not just to the customer, but to you as well. So the day-to-day of building a D2C can be incredibly hard, and you don't need me to tell you that. But I just want to reinforce the fact you do have that upper hand when it comes to building relationships. It's an incredible opportunity to be able to deliver meaning way beyond your product or service.
Amazing, amazing. So this opportunity, can you tell us a little bit more about this opportunity that you've referred to?
Sure. So number one is the fact you have full control over the entire customer experience. You've got no pesky middleman disrupting it in the middle, and you get to deliver customer service that really can be personal and attentive, quick, and ultimately constantly reinforce the message that your customers made the right choice. I guess number two is the fact that you're able to access and collect first-party data, which is gold if you use it. It allows you to create audience personas so you can deliver resonant, relevant propositions to each of those target groups. And equally, that first party data allows you to really quickly update them as people's preferences change, which they do, and sometimes quicker than you'd like. So and the final bit of that is it also opens the door to an insane level of personalization, both in product and service experience, but also in all of your engagement. That data allows you to match message to audience segment and communication preference. And as a brand, you get to feel intuitive and non-intrusive. So for me, you're really in pole position versus other brands because you constantly get to fine tune how you do that. And just before I drone on this, the other benefits of that goldmine of first-party data is that you can develop a brand and product ecosystem to continually add value, both with your own products, but also with like-minded partners. And it allows those product decisions in your innovation pipeline to be rooted in real customer need and desire. But I think the thing that I love most about working with D2Cs is you have the advantage to develop and test at speed. You get to learn what works and what doesn't, that doesn't cost you millions. So that's the world where no one knows what's coming next and preferences are changing all the time. You're really in the best position to adapt super quick. Oh, and obviously you can tell commercial came last. You are in full control of your margins.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, this sounds fantastic. I think, lots of companies are trying to do D2C. The execution is sometimes a little challenging. Costs of acquisition of customers is something that is also quite challenging. So those are the business aspects, but perhaps it's not just opportunities. Are there any other challenges that you think that we should be aware of when you do D2C?
Yes, for sure. And I would imagine that many of the businesses on this call are probably already facing some of these. Because at the start, attention is mostly focused on product development, on that early acquisition and sales. And because of this early focus, sometimes it's really easy to overlook the fundamental building block of creating a truly valuable brand from the outset, one that has meaning. And what I mean by brand, I don't just mean your visual identity. I mean all those components that go into delivering your product and service. So it's your philosophy, your vision, your values, your mission, your purpose, your story, your origin. And it's also your personality and your passion. Fundamentally, the experiences you create and those engagement strategies that you'll go on to craft. And all of those things that go into creating a brand experience that doesn't just drive sales. It's important, I'm not going to argue with you, but it creates a culture, it builds a community. So that's what I mean by brand.
Yeah, I guess, a lot of us think of brand. I think of Purina as a brand. I think of Unleashed as a brand. I think of The Sound as a brand. And we think about, we think of a name and then we associate it with, with, I suppose, some values. And I see in the chat that people have said that some of their favorite brands are authentic, they're fun, down to earth, shared values. Somebody has said his brand is wisdom for him, consistency. So I think those are really good things that people associate with their brands. And of course, with some of the brands which they don't like so much, it's perhaps, other things which are not as positive in these words. So when you talk about brand, Liz, can you kind of maybe expand a little bit on it? Is it just a name and the association? Is there more to it than that?
So I think I'll use Chewy as an example of a company that's really employed all the different aspects of brand well. So for those of you who don't know the detail, it was created in 2011 and only 6 years later was acquired by PetSmart on a valuation of 3.3 billion. And a huge part of that success was being rooted in being a brand first business, and really one that continued delivered on those core aspects of mission, values, and experience. And whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, on any given day, you will see consumer stories of how the brands acted for them. Not just delivering the product and service, that's the product, that's almost an afterthought. It's more about how they take care of people. And I think you've probably seen it. One recent example was a lady in the States called Anna Brose. Her dog Gus died, and she contacted Chewy to ask if she could return an unopened bag of food. And their response was not just to give her a full refund. They asked her to donate the food to the shelter, not to return it. But then she received flowers and a handwritten note from the actual person she spoke to on the phone. The power of this, not just in the emotional experience for Anna, was the fact the power for Chewy was then she went onto social and tweeted it. and it went viral. And not just that in itself isn't really the eye-opener. The eye-opener is how many people then responded, shared their stories of Chewy. I won't lie, I would love to have seen the analytics that day for their website and their conversion rates. So brand really is all of those different elements. And I'm happy in a bit to sort of take you through and break those down a bit more. But Kim, you just mentioned some of those challenges of what's happening at the moment. And I think just as that context, I think it's quite important to go into, because 10 years ago, customer acquisition for a startup could be either partly or even wholly driven by paid advertising. But the landscape and the rules of the game today have really, really shifted. Those first D2C brands, the value disruptors like Dollar Shave and Warby Parker, they use SEO and social ads with a really simple proposition to grow. And even the second wave, so we're talking about your Instagram brands, they also relied heavily on social and performance marketing. And they got to disrupt categories really quickly by buying customers, not earning them. But the landscape's so different today because firstly, we're living in this attention economy. With our attention being that scarcest of all resources. I read something the other day that was mind-blowing for me. Apparently, we on any given day, we take in 75 gig of information. So that's about 16 movies worth. And over half of that is made up of media. And amongst that is 4,000 paid ads we're exposed to every day. So our cognitive capacity to kind of see, absorb, parse and attribute value is super minimal. And then you've got to consider all the regulation changes, GDPR, Apple changing its mobile OS, Google's commitment to banning browsers. So all of those fantastic tools at the beginning to scale super fast without leaning into brand, they're not there anymore. You know, we've seen cost of acquisition ads going from 10 euros to 30 and upwards now. It's actually more expensive for a startup to use performance marketing than it is to use a third-party retailer or distributor. It's crazy.
So yeah, this is, yeah, I think I kind of really feel that, because I see all the media and everything that comes to me, and I usually just delete everything. So I don't even have the chance to kind of understand new brands. Very old fashioned, just stick to my old brands. So all this difficulties, customer acquisition costs, media, GDPR, etc. Why is this happening? Is it because it's just so much competition out there? Is it because digital is just so all pervasive? What is it?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things, but I guess the key ones are, first of all, that amazing D2C boom was great, but it triggered insane competition. Just one stat I read the other day, in 10 years, retail e-com sales have gone from 1.3 billion to 5.4. So that's almost 4 times. And as a result, these categories have become so crowded. One example that I really feel for is Casper. So I don't know if you know them. They were one of the first brands to sell mattresses online, and they now have more than 200 rivals, both with incumbents and new startups. So their first mover digital advantage long gone. And despite being an early success story heralded in the media, they haven't even become profitable yet. So it was reported a couple of weeks ago that they still lose $349 on every mattress. And they're not alone. It's many of the early D2Cs who were the hero stories have really struggled to deal with the pressures of growth, scale and competition. And added to that is the fact that the D2C aesthetic, so I mean like the visual identity, and you can see it across hundreds of brands, there's become this mass homogenization. So what was once a really key brand differentiator has become so diminished. I think Mark Ritson and people call it blanding. It's removed so many of the markers that can help a brand stand out. And it's this copycat branding from the old D2C playbook that's added a real hurdle, both for standout, but also for you to to your point, you get all this coming into your inbox. How do you know what to identify with if everything looks the same?
Right. So I was going to ask you what the keys to success are now that you've laid it out so clearly for us. But there is actually a question out there from Alexandre who's asking how to reconcile a direct-to-consumer strategy with increasing acquisition costs. And if you only rely on SEO, it takes time to take off in terms of sales. So any advice there?
Sorry, Kim, can you just repeat the second bit of that? So is it how do you
reconcile the fact that the acquisition costs are getting so high, and it's increasing day by day. You mentioned from 10 euros, 30 euros to on Facebook, and if you're only relying on SEO, organic growth, and so on, it takes a lot of time. So what does one do?
It does, and I think
one of the ways.
And I think you've got to work in balance, and there's got to be this tandem of two things, which is brand building activity, as well as, to your point, SEO and performance. In the early stage, really, if you're able to lean into your brand and get that word of mouth, it will work. That earned media will work far harder for you than paid media. But that sits in core fundamentals of knowing your audience, and I can go into that in a little bit for you. But the answer is you can't just be using performance marketing anymore. You have to look at other tactics within the marketing mix and a bigger marketing strategy than that. Because yes, otherwise your pace to growth is incredibly slow.
And that's a great transition to ask you, what are the keys to success? What can we do?
So, and I make it sound easy, but it's not. Differentiation. Not trying to compete on price, but on proposition and on experience, and particularly on experience. I've got a case study I'm going to share a little bit later. People want to buy from brands that stand for something, that align with their personal beliefs. So the focus has to be not just on that customer acquisition, but on building something that drives retention and lifetime value. And that is investing more in the experience, and also looking beyond that to build brand communities that keep people coming back. There are so many opportunities for a D2C to build this beautiful ecosystem and communication that pull people in, and it becomes intrinsically motivated. And those models prove that there's a higher propensity to purchase, higher retention, and increasing lifetime value with it. People pay more over the long term.
So what you're telling us is that we really have to relook how we do our customer acquisition. We need a completely new playbook to differentiate, to launch, to scale. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, that sounds like a big venture.
It is. I mean, I think the goal is to find product market fit in the shortest possible amount of time. I mean, in all honesty, it's the first time you can take a guilt-free lunch break, or in the case of one of my friends, actually close her laptop for 10 minutes without having a panic attack. So that absolutely requires this new playbook. And really, I just referred to it a moment ago, it's really based on one core principle, which is you've got to have balance. You have to balance long-term brand building with short-term sales activity. And very few people are actually doing this. Many, particularly D2Cs, fall into a trap of focusing first on sales because you have to prove that it can work, and then back into brand creation. And brands address the balance at different points in their journey. But evidence has shown that companies who deprioritize brand creation and brand building in favor of too much sales activity experience a significant cost when it comes to growth. There'll be a sharp ramp up, and then it either falls or sits and plateaus for forever. But you can see why people go down this road, because performance marketing gives you immediate results. And in the early days, that's what you want to see, and particularly if you're looking for investor input. But that return on investment is temporary and creates this fallacy of growth that comes at the expense of building long-term profitability. just in context, performance marketing focuses on that rational, the direct, the immediate. And brand building, which is why it feels like it's a nice to have, is longer term. It impacts attitudes and perceptions over the long term. But the thing is, it does add a layer of value. People on the end of brand building activity come to a transaction with improved consideration, boosted salience, and this is the most interesting thing I find, enhanced perception that the value of the brand is significantly more than their price they're being asked to pay for it. So I think it's worth, there's some fantastic work from Kantar and their Brand Z team, which actually looks at the different models. So whether you're 10%, 90, 80, 20, I can happily share links to this after the session. But to really answer that question, it's well worth looking at who's doing what, how they're toggling, how they're using different things in order to drive the success that they want.
Right. So, so you've said that you've got to do the marketing, the acquisition together with the brand building, because they are both, you know, kind of really essential. And I'm sure you're going to give us some examples of that.
Oh, my favorite bit, yes. So, and this is across both D2C and big multinationals. So there's sort of this sea change happening now. For those who are interested, there's a fantastic book called The Long and Short of It, which outlines these different strategies. But we've seen really big, large multinational brands rethinking their strategies. So Heinz are one of them. They got absolutely trashed in the media for the fact that they focused away from brand building to sales activation, and they saw a 5% dip in sales year on year until they started to correct back again. And then you've got Dove at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, who masterfully balance both strong emotional connection and driving brand building with those functional benefits. And one of the things about Dove is they really put digital at the heart, but they use digital in a different way. D2C Bombas was one of the other more recent ones. They originally, or it's close, I think it was about last year, were spending 80% of their marketing budget on SEO and performance, and they've cut that by 50% now. And I think another example is Airbnb. So they're very interesting because pre-pandemic, their CMO decided to shift marketing strategy and budget to be more brand driven. So they created more campaigns that was more about driving emotional connection than about creating conversion. And they created two campaigns. I think one was Strangers and the other Made by Host. You might have seen them. And there was, as a result of running those in each of the markets where they did that shift, they saw a 20% increase on traffic to the site and a relative increase in conversion. So, and their CMO, he can say it because he got a great result, but has said that his view now is that the role of marketing for Airbnb isn't to buy customers, but actually to look at education. And it's a really interesting shift. But as I say, we're seeing it all over the place, that everybody's having to react to it now. Unless you have limitless funds that you're willing to give to Facebook and Google for little return, you have to start looking at the different tools available.
So what I get from what I've heard is that this brand brings you this very emotional bond or attachment to your consumers, and absolutely, that if you are able to have this strong emotional connection, you will be able to sell more. So I think that's really interesting, because we are all today looking at stories, we are looking at the power of emotions and so on. So tell us how our startups, and we have got a number of startups here, we have got almost 100 registered here. How can they actually make their brand their superpower?
Yeah. Right. So
and make it really, really practical.
I will. I'll try. And I should say, please, to anyone who's listening to this, please connect with me after this session if you want to know more or discuss in more detail. A lot of the things I know I'm touching on could be like an hour's conversation of its own. So please do reach out to me afterwards if I haven't given you what you need. Okay, building brand superpower. So the first thing is recognizing that people, including us, and Kim, you referenced at the beginning, we need authenticity. Read any consumer sentiment study, and first thing that hits you is people want to buy from brands that they believe in and they trust. And at the core of this is a need to see that a brand's authentic, because consumers can seriously, you can smell a rat when it comes to what's real and what's not.
Absolutely.
It can't be faked. And this is one of the reasons why for a D2C and a startup, this is where you can win. Because many, if not all of you, started your business based on a problem that you want to solve, either for yourselves or as pet owners, or as people passionate about making pets and pet owners' lives better, more enjoyable, more rewarding. You're making the hard choices, the sacrifices, you're toggling tensions every day because you believe in what you're trying to do. So all of this comes from the heart, and this matters because, one, it's your origin story. It's human and it's real, and it's what people will connect with and identify with. And if you get it right, they'll champion for you. So whether you call it purpose or origin story, this core component and building block of your brand is your first superpower. And I'll just give it, sorry, I'm going to throw in some examples here. So one that I still love, and I'm mentioning it not because Purina required them, but just because I was very passionate about them, which is Lily's Kitchen. So started by Henrietta Morrison to try and solve her dog Lily's health issues. The brand succeeded then and succeeds today when you talk to consumers because of that her origin story, that it wasn't about creating a new food brand. It was about improving two lives, hers and Lily's. And many pet owners were experiencing the very same problem that Henrietta was. And there was this huge opportunity. Now, the halo's gone beyond that, and the market opportunity is much wider because it's got much more mass appeal. But ultimately, it was that origin story that connected consumers at the beginning and continues to lend credibility now. And for a non-pet example, Gymshark, which is a fitness brand, it was the first UK brand to hit unicorn status without external funding. And this was started from Ben, who's the CEO. His frustration is when he was at university, he couldn't find suitable and affordable gym clothes for bodybuilding. So he started making his own. I think his grandmother taught him how to sew using curtains. And yeah, it's now incredible. First $1 billion value business. So there are loads of examples, and I really could bore you to death. I promise you my team would tell you this. But the key takeaway is your origin story, your reason for putting yourself through this Herculean task of what you're trying to do has to be number one.
So yeah, Liz, I mean, we hear a lot of startups tell us their origin stories, the founder stories, and many of them are sometimes quite similar. You know, my dog or my cat was not in the best of health, you know, and so we decided to home cook for him, and we decided to do things. And so sometimes it does sound like a lot of these founder stories are very similar. And what is special about a founder story that actually catches that attention and makes this emotional attachment? Because I think it's really important to help our startups understand that, you know, stories need to be differentiated as well. If you have a story that's similar to everybody's story, then maybe it gets a little lost. Any thoughts on that?
And that's actually a very good point, because if you open, I think in the last year, if you look at the most recent food startups, they all have that similar edge to it. And I think there are two things here. One, which is, don't think of it in isolation. Brand's one of those things you've got to think of as a jigsaw. You've got your origin story, but if you take your origin story versus someone else's, yes, they could be in parity. But your origin story plus your values plus the way you look plus the way you communicate and how you build, if you invest in building a community, it's that jigsaw that makes the difference, that feels distinctive. And the other thing is as well, I remember being taught this years ago, is when you're trying to write your origin story, have somebody keep asking you the question, why? Why did you do it? Why did you do it? Because in many cases, the top level answer is, I had a pet who was sick. If you keep going down, and I know this for one in particular that's actually quite successful today, the final why became because they felt really frustrated. They'd hit 43 years old. They were going through a midlife crisis. They didn't want to spend their life being, you know, there was this whole backstory that was so different that framed why that was the right moment. They built that into a publicly shared message. And suddenly there was so many human elements that people could identify with. So it's not just about having a really beautifully copywritten, Kim, as you said, story. It's about ask yourself, why is this different? Because there'll always be something unique in there, and it'll be the human truth that people will go to.
So I guess the lesson is really spend some time thinking about your founder story, and don't take the easy way out. You know, make sure that you ask the whys, and maybe there are 10 whys before you really get to the authenticity of it, and something that really sticks. There's a question here. When should a business start the brand building process? Is it at MVP, first sales, frequent sales? And then any tips on tweaking or changing the brand image or story if the original is not selling?
So really simple answer, immediately. You have to start the moment you have the idea. And the reason for this is, as much as you will have all this, like your origin story and everything else, it only works if you understand your customer. And assuming that you're working first off a principle that you try to get to know at least your immediate target audience, you've got to put those two things together. And I think in terms of it's not going to be static either. I think if I look at, and I would recommend definitely for sort of history to look back on, if you look at how brands evolved for the startups from that first sketch on a napkin through the first 3 to 4 years, there's a massive evolution. There's a massive evolution both on look and feel, but also on messaging as you get it right. And I'm very happy, whoever asked that question, message me, because there's a lot more that I can give you in terms of tips and things to actually do this properly and a process to follow. But the short answer is immediately, because you need to understand why something's not working so you can correct. And the second part of it is always think there's an A/B test somewhere in this.
Yeah. So, you know, you make it sound as though, you know, this branding exercise is kind of quite straightforward, quite simple. Is it really that easy? Start building on your brand, you know, and talk about your founder story and work on it. So is it really that straightforward?
Yes and no. In some ways it should be, because it's real. But the hard work is in how you capture and communicate your story and your values. So create your brand personality, which has to be distinctive. And as I mentioned a moment ago, being distinctive is no mean feat. It requires a serious amount of thought and creativity, but it also means going where others don't, to really have an identity. As I mentioned before, the world of D2C branding has become a sea of bland, and it's even in pet. And you only needed to pop your head around the door of Interzoo, which was Nuremberg's pet fair this month, to see we're well on our way to blandness with pet. And there are some great examples of exceptions, such as Nom Nom. I love The Bear and the Rat. If you don't know them, please look them up. But they are more of an exception than a rule. And this is happening because there's a view that when a category has adopted a similar visual identity, it's reached maturity. And a warning sign is that the market may also have reached saturation, which for me is kind of staggering with pet, because it's ever expanding and growing, and yet this homogenization's already crept in. So to stand out, you have to be distinctive, but it is hard. And it's not just a case of hiring a good design agency. You have to do the work to be really clear about how you want to be different, and also really come to terms with the fact that sometimes it's easier and nicer and gives you a warmer feeling of familiarity if you fit in. But fitting in and familiarity is the road to ruin as a startup.
Right, right. So what about the value proposition? How do you work that in to your brand?
Right. So again, this has to be done up front. And I've worked with quite a few brands that before they've even gone to market, have invested the time to try and work out what the right value prop is, or at least the first one to take into market. Again, there are models, and I'm happy to spend hours talking to anyone who wants to do this. But the sort of two key principles are: one, you have to figure this out up front. Don't back into it. Conventional and Reddit threads will tell you, just get your product to market, communicate it based on light touch features and benefits, talk to those early adopters to find out why it's working, and then build your proposition off that. I call it a Frankenstein value prop. But the issue with that is you are limiting your audience to the needs, pain points, and feedback of that small audience who've tested your product first. And what you actually need to do is start at the beginning, look at your market, get to understand the focus areas and targets you want to talk to and sell your product to, and then understand what's valuable to them, and then put those pieces of the value prop. And you can test that before you even build the first product. You can test whether things are salient, what that ratio of functional to emotional benefits needs to be. And particularly what your USP is. I'm sorry for this, a little bit of academia. There was a Harvard Business Review case study which talked about building the ultimate value proposition, and they lay out this 20-page process. And at the end of it, it's undermined by a question that was asked by someone, and they admitted it, which is, can you give us an example of someone who's done this properly? And they said no, because everybody falls down on the thing of what makes you unique. But again, there are more D2Cs and startups that do have a unique identifier than other businesses. Sorry, I kind of went off on a rabbit hole. Sorry, Kim.
So you talked about, the branding, you talked about unlocking a value proposition. And I guess, there is kind of brand positioning and brand communications. How do you deal with that? And when does that come in?
Right. So brand positioning is up there at the beginning. And really that's, if you follow this stage of, I know who my target audience are. I know what's valuable to them, and I know what they need in terms of your early research and pain points. So I'm really clear on those things. Here's how my product or service is addressing those. And then here's the emotional benefit. Effectively, that's what your brand positioning statement. I would be shocked by so many brand strategists right now for simplifying it to that. I can share a model afterwards, but effectively, brand positioning literally portrays who you serve, the value you offer, why you're in business, and what makes you different from the competition. But it's not something you put on your website. It effectively helps you stay on track and guides decisions as you move forward. And you will then take that to craft messaging that becomes your brand comms. And just back to that piece at the beginning when I said about your first party data, the beauty of having that is, depending on the different personas of your audience, you get to tweak that messaging and those communications to dial up on the things that are really important to them and personalize that message. So your brand positioning is literally your who are we, what do we do, why are we in business, and for your company. And then your comms is everything outside to the world. I'll give you one example of brand comms that kind of ticks the box I was talking about earlier about differentiation and being distinctive, and that's Off Limits Cereal. They are well worth looking up. Because they've broken out of the category norm, they've created characters, they've gone for a strong visual identity, they've really clearly communicated story, values, ethos, and they've got a really, really clear value prop. So that's Off Limits Cereal. I would definitely recommend, if not eating it, at least looking it up.
So we've done all that, Liz. We have done everything that you've said, value proposition, the positioning of our brand. We've written this down for our internal comms and so on and so forth. Is that it? So when do we have to review that, or does it last forever? Do we stick to it and really kind of drive forward with what we've done?
Sadly, no. I think rule of thumb here is as culture changes, as the market changes, and as your consumers change, you have to adapt with it. So your core, who you are, what you stand for, stays the same, but how you may then communicate that will vary depending on how to be relevant in that moment, and your product portfolio might change depending on that. So your core doesn't, but how you connect with consumers will.
So Liz has a question. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
From Samantha, she wants to know if you have got any recommendations on measurement for brand activity outside of brand tracking or MMM.
I do, but Sam, do you want to connect with me after this? Otherwise, I think that's one where I really will go down a rabbit hole. But yes, happy to share.
I will share the email of Liz.
Amazing.
Or Liz, you can just type it down, and then people can connect with you if they've got any kind of questions. Sorry about that. I wanted to get questions in, and guys, we have only 15 minutes left, so please ask your questions now and don't wait until the last minute. If you have got any questions, please do. Sorry, so we were talking about brand experience, and did I cut you off there?
No, not at all, not at all. So,
tell us about the this is the category that we are all in, and we are all quite passionate about. Tell us about this. Is it any different?
Yes, absolutely. And there's one aspect that I didn't get to in the building blocks, which relates to pet, that I'll share as I'll tell you, because it's my favorite story of the month. So yes, pet category. There is nothing like it, and you'll see I'm going to start gesticulating, probably knocking loads of things over. Nothing else has the same excitement, energy, opportunity for growth as pet, and you've got three things going for you in it. The first is consistent year-on-year increases in pet adoptions and ownership. We're seeing a really significant rise in the number of pet owners who see their pet as a friend or family member, and that's created a really highly engaged, motivated and resourced audience. And by three, you've got Mother Nature lending a helping hand. Have to tell you this, in 2012, a researcher, Miho Nagasawa at the Asabu University in Japan, conducted an experiment looking at the physiological effects of a human looking at their dog and interacting with their pet. And in the study, when a dog owner looked at their dog, they experienced the same physiological effects as when looking at their newborn child. Wow. The chemical change in their body was almost identical. They measured the urine, but the researcher detected similar increases in oxytocin, which is the love hormone, dopamine, the pleasure and reward hormone, and serotonin. It's an incredible amount of love and happiness with one look. And before you think it's just reserved for dog owners, a similar study was done with cat owners interacting with their pets, and it showed a really similar level of all of those three hormones just by interacting with their pet. And as a result of that, and where this is relevant for you, is you're in a category where you have got a highly engaged, emotionally driven consumer who has a predisposition to engage with you beyond your transaction. We see in the pet category, and as I say, this is my world, we see pet owners more likely to invest more time and energy in exploring the category, to spend more than an original plan budget, to make trade-offs that sacrifice their own needs for those of their pet. But also from a brand building and community stance, they're much more likely to join communities of like-minded people, or to engage in two-way conversations with brands that inspire them, even getting into WhatsApp groups to talk about product innovation, service innovation. and they will absolutely advocate for brands that make them feel they've done something good for their pet, that a brand who's given them the opportunity to deepen that relationship. They really are a completely different type of consumer. They've got totally unique dynamic. I mean, in all instances of there are two decision makers and one of them can't talk. So whether it's food, a tracker, toy, all the best intentions of your human consumer can be absolutely undone if the animal decides not to play ball. So one thing just to bear in mind as I tell this wonderful story about your amazing consumers, for pet owners, a brand's value equation is a really complex thing. And it's made up of efficacy, experience, emotional reward, and engagement, and not just the humans, the pets as well.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. And, this is what we deal with every day. But not all pet owners think and feel the same way, right? They are quite different.
No, and I think this is also a tool for those of you who are starting to think about how you segment your audience. And please do reach out because I can share some guides and things that will help you. Understanding the type of relationship a person has with the pet will give you all the insight you need in understanding how they approach the category, and what role you and your brands can play with them. So just one sort of thing to think about is people who have a deeper, more humanistic relationship with their pet, that's seeing them as a friend or family member, invest more of themselves in a decision process, educate themselves about the pet, put the health needs and commit more time and energy to getting it right. Finding the perfect solution. They're driven to find the perfect solution. So there's a whole lot that sits around this, and you've got, and I'll just give you a context. If you've got one end of the spectrum, think of your sort of pet owner as the farmer who's got cats on his land to keep rats and mice at bay, and they probably don't have names, all the way at the other end of the spectrum to probably someone like me who treats them like a baby and will spend inordinate amounts of money on it. You've got everybody in between, and pet owners along that spectrum are willing to give a lot, but the further up that spectrum you move, the more they demand of a brand.
So Liz, there's a question here. I think it's an interesting one. And one of our participants wants to know if you have a favorite story where a brand story or an image backfired and killed the company. So if you if you
WeWork, I can give you that one straight away, and I am
quite dramatic.
I was going to say WeWork for me, and I'm personally, here's the value, here's the impact a brand can have. I am personally angry and literally am infuriated every time because I was one of the early proponents. I took WeWork space. I advocated WeWork. I sold that vision of community to so many people because I believed in it and I believed in that early story. And then the more you discovered, the more you saw the lack of authenticity when you saw how they treated their people, and this wonderful shining image just kind of collapsed. It didn't just stop me from using WeWork. I felt cheated. I felt lied to. I felt, well, you're seeing the response now. You can probably tell this is my way to vet, but that's where it's wrong. And that's where optics are favored over authenticity. That's probably the best example to show you why being true to something is more valuable. Because I have a disproportionate response to WeWork than I should.
And some banks come to mind, and some of the other big names come to mind as well. So yeah, I'm sure there are lots of books about that. We've got 5 minutes left, and what I'd really like to do, Liz, is to ask you, kind of to summarize what our audience can focus on today and what can help them. Just from a very practical point of view. I know there's lots there. I'm sure they can connect with you afterwards. But tell us, in kind of a summary form, what should our audience be doing after this talk?
So, absolutely. So I think in order of priority, if you haven't done it, it's really take a step back and look at your customer base, who your target audience is. And again, please reach out because I can give you lots of things, how you can do it without spending any money at all to get that depth and expert opinion to help you see that. The first up is get to know who your audience really is. So by that, I mean scale, but also going deep so that you're able to segment your future audience into who's most valuable so that you can focus your activity there, particularly to the question earlier about how do you get there if you're not, how do you reach these people if you're not doing SEO and investing that? How do you get to those different target audiences? The second thing is taking a look at the experience. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to it because I've talked too much. I did an experiment last year that I'm happy to share with anybody after this, where we built 3 different propositions for experience, from very light touch through to highly personalized, even down to simple things like addressing a package to the pet rather than the owner. And the end result being that we asked for perception of value after that experience. And the sort of option C that had only cost €3 more as a unit economics was valued at 4 times the price they were being asked for. And if it was a real product, would sign up for it. So experience has to be up there. And it's one of those things that you kind of think, we'll get there as we grow, we'll build a more extended experience. It's actually your experience that will drive word of mouth and earned media to help you grow. So, and from a unit economics, it really, printing a white label that's addressed to an owner versus printing a white label that's addressed to the pet, it's, you know, it's going to cost you the same, but the value it will have is huge. So number 2 is start looking at that experience based on what your infrastructure can uphold today, but also to start thinking about what you need to design for in the future to do it at scale. And then the third thing is a question to ask you, which is based on what you know of your customers, and based on what you know from even the little I've told you. And again, please hit me up after this because I can talk to you for hours with insight on pet owners. How can you create opportunities for them to talk about you? It's going to be your biggest driver right now. And it's easy to do. Gymshark is a prime example of how they did it without spending one marketing dollar. But those would be the really key things for me that I would, and I'm happy to talk to anybody and help after.
That is amazing. Liz, thank you so much. The time has just flown by. Everything that you've said makes such a lot of sense and so important, right? So please look at your brands. Please think about how you want to talk about your brand, the values, the positioning, and so on. Well done, Liz. Thank you so much. I will share any information you'd like to share with the community in our Slack group. So please do send me the stuff and also your email address. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I want to wish you again a very, very great summer holidays. And we'll talk to you in August. I think we'll have our next talk at the end of August. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.